If you want coaching, the link is in the description. And before you ask, no, I don't do pimping anymore. I retired from that chaos with my sanity partially intact and my curiosity fully sharpened. Now I study people the way a watchmaker studies gears. Not out of sentimentality, but because I want to know why they break, why they jam, and why they insist on repeating the same pattern until the whole mechanism collapses. So let's talk about men. Specifically, let's talk about that moment when he looks at you with soft eyes, touches your hand, maybe kisses your forehead, like he's auditioning for the role of the man you swear you're done dating, and then says the line that has launched more confusion than the Tower of Babel. I'm not ready. Ah, the poetry of it, the elegance, the absolute emptiness disguised as depth. He delivers it like he's a wounded soldier returning from war, when in reality, the only trauma he's survived is a mildly disappointing childhood and a few Tinder dates that didn't go anywhere. But before you think this is about bashing men, allow me to disappoint you. This is not an emotional takedown. This is an autopsy. We're not here to blame. We're here to understand. Because when a man says he's not ready, he rarely means what you think he means. In fact, he rarely means what he thinks he means. Most people are strangers to their own motivations, and men, God bless them, often walk through their emotional lives like tourists trying to read a map that's upside down. So let's peel back the skin and look at the anatomy underneath. At first glance, I'm not ready sounds noble, mature, even self-aware. It suggests he's protecting you, shielding you from the hurricane of chaos he claims to be. But if you believe that at face value, then you're playing checkers while he's accidentally playing chess. And I do mean accidentally, because most men who utter this line are not masterminds. They're not plotting. They're not manipulating. They're simply doing what humans do best, avoiding discomfort. In behavioral psychology, researchers call this cognitive dissonance reduction. A 2020 study in Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin found that when people act in ways inconsistent with what they think they want, they instinctively invent explanations that make them feel coherent, even if those explanations crumble under scrutiny. In simpler terms, people lie to themselves first, so they can lie smoothly to others without feeling like monsters. Men, bless their contradictory souls, are Olympic-level self-liars. So when he says he's not ready, he's trying to soothe the internal conflict between enjoying your presence and not wanting to commit to it. It's the emotional equivalent of telling yourself you're saving money while you're actively entering your credit card into a website for $300 sneakers. The brain hates feeling split, so it invents a story that feels clean. But here's the twist. He's not trying to deceive you. He's trying to deceive himself. You're just collateral damage. Now let's address the question hanging like smoke in the room. What does he actually mean? There are many versions of the truth, and none of them are comforting. That's what makes them true. Men are not complex creatures. They're not mystical. They're not cracked codes hiding in psychological caves, waiting for you to decode them. They're biological machines with simple programs, many of which haven't been updated since the Pleistocene. When he says he's not ready, the more accurate translation is usually this: I'm ready for you physically. I'm ready for you emotionally when it benefits me. I'm ready for you on weekends when I'm lonely. But I'm not ready for the version of you that requires accountability, consistency, and visibility. That version demands adulthood, and adulthood is something I've been dodging like tax season. But he can't say that. Not because he's wicked, but because he doesn't have the vocabulary or self-awareness to confess it. So he reaches for the phrase society has given him. I'm not ready. He thinks it's honesty. He thinks it's transparency. He thinks it's better than saying, I'm not choosing you. Women often misinterpret this as fear, that if she just gives him time, space, affection, therapy sessions disguised as pillow talk, and the unending patience of a kindergarten teacher teaching the alphabet to a raccoon, he will eventually become ready. But you must understand, men do not become ready. They decide. Read that again. Men don't become ready like bread rising in an oven. They decide, abruptly and with shocking decisiveness, when someone activates the dormant instinct for commitment they've been suppressing since puberty. One day, he's wandering like a tumbleweed. The next, he's proposing with a ring he bought 3 hours ago at a mall kiosk. If the phrase, I'm not ready, escapes his mouth while he's with you, you must accept a reality that many women resist because it bruises the ego. You are meeting him at a moment when he is not choosing you fully, not because you're lacking, but because his internal machinery is not aligning with your timeline. But does that mean you should leave? Does that mean you should stay? Should you test him? Challenge him? Walk away dramatically in slow motion like a movie heroine with a soundtrack swelling behind her? Calm yourself. We're not there yet. Right now, we are still in the examination room, slicing through the layers of male psychology with the cold detachment of a scientist who left empathy at home. Let's go deeper. There is a reason men default to, I'm not ready, rather than, I don't want this. It gives them plausible deniability. It gives them a back door. It gives them the ability to return later and say, I was going through something, even if that something was merely the existential crisis of choosing between you and his Xbox. You see, men love options the way dragons love gold, not because they need them, but because they fear losing them. I'm not ready keeps the door cracked open, just wide enough for him to wander back in, if his dating adventures lead him through a wasteland of awkward brunches, unhinged exes, and women who text like ransom notes. But you are steady. You are comforting. You are predictable in a world where he is unpredictable to himself. And that terrifies him. Because stability demands reciprocation, and reciprocation demands maturity. And maturity demands that he stops behaving like an emotional squatter, living inside your affection without paying rent. But again, you're not supposed to fix him. You're not supposed to decode him. You're not supposed to therapize him into becoming a man who can stand on his own legs. You're supposed to understand what's happening, without illusions, without fantasies, without the delusion that you can outlove, outpatience, or out-sacrifice someone's psychological inertia. Because once you understand, you can choose. And choice, my dear, is the real power. Understanding always comes before power, but most people rush toward power the way moths fling themselves into flames, eager, reckless, and deeply unprepared for the smoke. So before you imagine yourself rising like some triumphant phoenix, understand this. You're still in the laboratory with me, standing over the dissected psychology of a man who thinks he's a mystery simply because he cannot read himself. Now let's examine the deeper root of the phrase, I'm not ready. Not the polite version, not the romanticized version, the primal version, the one that lurks beneath his polished words, beneath his curated self-image, beneath whatever performance he's rehearsed for you, like a nervous actor, before a school play. When a man says he's not ready, he is often announcing one of the simplest truths about human nature. He fears losing his autonomy more than he desires gaining intimacy. You think intimacy is an invitation. He experiences it as a potential trap. Not because you're a trap, though some of you are quite talented at creating emotional labyrinths that would confuse a minotaur, but because commitment threatens the one thing he guards more fiercely than his heart, his freedom to drift. People love to pretend that men fear commitment because of immaturity, but immaturity is just the surface. Underneath it lies something much more interesting. The psychological recoil that happens when a man encounters someone who can actually affect him. Not in a superficial way, not in a dopamine hit way, but in a way that might demand he abandons his delusions of infinite possibilities. A man's life is often divided into two eras. The era in which he believes he is designed for limitless potential, and the era in which he realizes most of those potentials are fantasies he crafted as a shield from his inadequacies. When you arrive, he is somewhere between those two eras. And that, my dear, is where the chaos begins. Because if he admits he is ready, truly ready, then he loses his excuse, his potential, his imaginary future self who is always more evolved, more stable, more emotionally available than the version standing in front of you. His fantasies provide him comfort. You provide him reality. And humans, regardless of gender, will almost always choose the comforting fantasy, unless the reality in front of them is so compelling, so richly aligned with their needs, that turning away feels like self-destruction. But here's the irony. Most men don't know what their needs actually are. They only know their habits, their desires, their distractions. And distractions are dangerous, because they create the illusion of satisfaction without the substance of fulfillment. So when he says, "I'm not ready," part of what he's confessing, without knowing he's confessing it, is that he is terrified of choosing incorrectly. Modern men suffer from a particular disease, a psychological condition I call infinite scroll syndrome. They live in a world where options are endless, attention spans are shrinking, and the belief that something better might appear with just one more swipe becomes intoxicating. This is not romantic. This is not noble. This is survival instinct corrupted by overstimulation. Men used to choose partners based on physical proximity, shared values, and the basic human urge to avoid dying alone in a cave. But now he has access to an endless carnival of faces, bodies, voices, and curated illusions available on demand, 24 hours a day. And even if he's not actively indulging in them, the possibility of indulging lingers in the back of his mind, like a siren whispering from behind a velvet curtain. "I'm not ready," is his way of saying, "I fear choosing one will force me to silence the fantasy of many." Most won't admit this. Most don't even consciously know it. But psychologically, the fear of losing optionality is stronger today than at any point in human history. And here's the part that stings. The more extraordinary you are, the more destabilizing the choice becomes for him. Choosing someone above his station, someone beyond his expectations, someone who forces him to confront the parts of himself that are unimpressive or underdeveloped. That is a threat, not a comfort. You think you are the reward. He experiences you as the mirror. And men have a complicated relationship with mirrors. They prefer the ones that flatter, not the ones that reveal. If you elicit a version of him he is not ready to face, he'll retreat behind the shield of not being ready, when the truth is much more primitive. He is not willing to become the man he suspects you require. Let me tell you a secret from the vaults of behavioral psychology. Humans rarely avoid relationships because of the other person's flaws. They avoid them because of the version of themselves they would have to embody inside that relationship. Responsibility is heavier than attraction. Consistency is more demanding than desire, and growth is far more painful than pleasure. He knows this, even if only intuitively, and you, unknowingly, represent the fork in his psychological road. He can either stay the boy he understands, or become the man he does not yet trust himself to be. So he chooses stasis, cloaked in noble language. He packages his avoidance as emotional honesty. He disguises his fear as maturity, and he hopes you'll applaud him for being transparent, instead of recognizing he is simply choosing the comfort of his limitations over the uncertainty of his evolution. But do not misunderstand. This does not make him weak. It makes him human. Humans are creatures of avoidance long before they are creatures of love. Modern society has sold the lie that men must be fearless warriors of commitment, when in reality, they are often terrified archaeologists digging through the rubble of their past failures, trying to discover if anything valuable remains. So when he says he's not ready, part of him might be telling the truth. But the truth is not what you think it is. He might not be ready to love without conditions. He might not be ready to be seen without masks. He might not be ready to choose without hesitation. But most importantly, he might not be ready to face the version of himself that emerges only in the presence of a woman who expects more from him than he has ever expected from himself. And that version requires courage. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, unsettling courage of becoming someone he cannot retreat from. This is why men say they're not ready. Not because they are broken, not because they are malicious, but because they are caught between the person they want to be and the person they have the discipline to become. And discipline, for most modern men, is a foreign language they never learned to speak. You're still here, which tells me two things. You're either fascinated, offended, or quietly realizing this entire dissection applies to a man whose contact photo is still pinned to the top of your messages like a shrine. Either way, welcome back. Pull on your gloves. We're going deeper. We've talked about why he says he's not ready. Now we need to talk about the part everyone avoids. What happens to him internally after he says it? See, most people imagine a man who announces he's not ready, then walks away feeling triumphant, relieved, emotionally weightless, as if he's just donated blood and now gets a cookie. But that's not how it works. The male psyche is not that tidy. Men are not robots executing logical equations. They are conflict-ridden animals performing emotional calculus with crayons. Once those words leave his mouth, something strange happens inside him. Not immediately, but gradually, quietly, the way mold spreads in a dark room. At first, he feels control. Saying, "I'm not ready," gives him leverage over an emotional situation he didn't know how to navigate. It buys him time, space, distance, whatever illusion he needs to maintain his perceived autonomy. But then the silence begins its work. Men are deeply affected by absence, far more than they admit. And absence, my dear, is a cruel scientist. It tests hypotheses he didn't know he had. He starts replaying things. That conversation, your expression when he said it, a memory of you laughing at something stupid he said, a moment in his car when he caught himself imagining a future that he swore he didn't want. He won't admit any of this, not to you, not to his friends, not even to himself unless he's alone, late at night, sitting on the edge of his bed staring at his phone like it's an interrogation lamp. Because here's the truth. When he says, "I'm not ready," He expects you to react in a predictable way. Most women either cling tighter or disappear dramatically. He's mentally prepared for either. Those are the familiar scripts. But what he's never prepared for, what destabilizes him completely, is when you simply keep living. Not theatrically, not with performative independence, not with long speeches and tearful monologues. Just silence, just space, just the quiet continuation of your life. And that's when something primitive wakes up inside him. Not love, not regret, not panic. Something much simpler. Curiosity. See, men move through the world, believing they are the ones who choose, that they are the hunters, that they are the agents of pursuit. But when he feels you slipping out of his gravitational field, the illusion breaks. Suddenly, he is no longer the one deciding. Suddenly, there is a possibility, however faint, that you might evolve into someone he no longer has access to. And that scares him more than commitment ever did. Because commitment is a choice. Losing you is a consequence. Consequences hurt more. Most men don't fear relationships. They fear irrelevance. They fear being replaced. They fear discovering that the woman they took for granted has a world outside of him. A world that is bigger, richer, and entirely uninterested in waiting for his evolution. So while he's telling himself he's not ready, another voice inside him begins whispering, what if she's moving on? What if she finds someone better? What if I miscalculated? What if I underestimated her? What if I lose something I didn't realize I wanted? He won't admit these questions. Not to you. Not to himself. Men rarely confess vulnerability in the moment. They confess it only when they're standing in the ruins they built. But here's the irony. This internal conflict he's experiencing is not romantic. It's biological, psychological, evolutionary. Absence activates a man's threat detectors. It exposes the truth behind his earlier declaration. Because if he was truly not ready, the loss of you would feel neutral. But if it stings, if it lingers, if he feels a strange hollowness in his chest when your name doesn't appear on his screen, then he was ready enough to feel the loss, just not ready enough to take the responsibility. Humans love to lie to themselves, remember. Men are simply more elegant at disguising it as logic. Now here's the part that most people refuse to confront. I'm not ready is rarely about timing. It's about thresholds. A man becomes ready the moment the pain of indecision becomes greater than the fear of commitment. Not the moment you give him patience. Not the moment you sacrifice. Not the moment you explain your worth like a PowerPoint presentation. The moment he feels the weight of losing you. Not through manipulation. Don't flatter yourself. Through the natural progression of reality. And reality does not care about his comfort. This is the paradox. He avoids committing because he fears losing freedom. And then he starts losing you. And suddenly he realizes freedom without you feels like a punishment. But you must not mistake this psychological earthquake for a sign. It is not a green light. It is not a guarantee of return. It is simply the beginning of his reckoning. Because once the curiosity begins, something else follows. Evaluation, not of you, of himself. He questions his decisions, his patterns, his assumptions, his bravado, his certainty. He wonders whether he projected immaturity onto you to avoid admitting immaturity in himself. He wonders if not ready was wisdom or cowardice. He wonders if he genuinely needs time, or if he simply didn't want to grow in the direction you required. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Men often figure these things out too late. By the time he realizes he may have misjudged the situation, you may have already positioned yourself beyond his reach. And nothing destabilizes the male ego more than realizing he miscalculated a woman's capacity to walk away with grace instead of theatrics. So remember this. When a man says he's not ready, he's not closing the story. He's starting the slow, inevitable process of confronting the parts of himself he's been avoiding. Sometimes he emerges stronger. Sometimes he disappears into his own avoidance. But the moment he says it, the clock begins ticking. Not for you, for him. Before we go further, let me warn you. This is the part most people can't handle. Up to now, we've stayed in the arena of psychology. Clean, clinical, almost surgical. This is where we step back and look at the broader ecosystem, the landscape that shapes men long before they ever sit across from you and utter those fatal words, "I'm not ready." Because the truth is, he didn't invent that phrase. He inherited it. Modern men are raised inside a psychological paradox. They are told to remain independent while also being told to be emotionally open, to take their time finding themselves, while simultaneously being pressured to perform adulthood, to expand endlessly while also settling responsibly. It's contradictory instruction. It's a maze without an exit. It's a sermon preached by people who didn't follow it themselves. So men grow up learning one core strategy for survival. Delay. Delay adulthood. Delay commitment. Delay identity. Delay decisions until the consequences catch up and there's nowhere left to run. When a man says he's not ready, he is not announcing a spontaneous truth. He is revealing a lifelong habit. He has been postponing parts of himself for years. You're simply the first person who noticed. But here's the twist, an uncomfortable one. He is not delaying because he wants to explore. He is delaying because he is overwhelmed by the responsibility of becoming. Responsibility is heavy. Identity is heavier. Being someone's partner, consistently, reliably, visibly, is heavier still. Men crave being admired, but commitment demands being accountable. Those are not the same currency, and most men prefer admiration because it costs them almost nothing. Let me show you what I mean. When he says, "I'm not ready," he wants you to hear, "I am protecting you from the storm inside me." But what he actually means is closer to, "I don't trust myself to show up consistently, and I don't want to face the shame of disappointing you." Men don't fear relationships. They fear being exposed as unserious inside one. They fear being seen, truly seen. Not the curated version they present on dates, but the internal chaos they haven't organized yet. Financial uncertainty, emotional delays, identity confusion, unresolved ambitions, childhood wounds they never examined, habits they know aren't sustainable, and fears they pretend they don't feel, because society told them men aren't supposed to tremble. If emotional transparency were a currency, most men would be bankrupt. But let's get even more precise. When a man tells you he's not ready, he's often reacting to a subtle shift in your dynamic. You've reached the threshold where intimacy becomes accountability. The relationship has moved from casual lightness to meaningful potential. And in that moment he senses, instinctively, that your expectations are evolving. Not demands, not pressure, not ultimatums, just the organic weight of deeper connection. And connection is a mirror. Mirrors are terrifying. People love the myth that men fear love. They don't. They fear the responsibility love requires. Love demands diligence. It demands honesty. It demands a consistent self. A self he may not have built yet. So instead of admitting, "I'm afraid I'll fail in front of you," he chooses the painless language of delay. "I'm not ready." It sounds noble. It feels protective. It places the blame on time rather than inadequacy. It gives him an exit that preserves his pride. But let's zoom in even further, because this is where the truth becomes brutally clear. There are three psychological forces wrestling inside him in that moment. The first is desire. He wants you. He enjoys you. You matter to him. The second is fear. Fear of loss. Fear of failure. Fear of stepping into a role he doesn't know how to play. The third is inertia, the most powerful force of all. Humans don't choose what is best for them. They choose what is easiest to sustain. A relationship requires energy. Avoidance requires none. But you must not misinterpret this inertia as a commentary on your worth. It isn't. It's a commentary on his readiness to confront himself. Let me tell you something most women never hear. Men don't avoid you because you're too much. They avoid you because you make them feel like too little. You awaken a version of them they don't yet have the discipline to maintain. You highlight the gap between who they are and who they wish they were. And that gap is a wound, one they'd rather ignore. So he tells you he's not ready, because it's the closest he can come to admitting, "I am not yet the man I want to be in your presence." This is not flattery. This is the truth beneath the truth. But what happens next, even more revealing, is how he behaves after the declaration. Because "I'm not ready" is not a conclusion. It's a psychological turning point. For him, not for you. This is where men enter the internal split no one ever talks about. A division between two futures, both of which terrify him. Future A. He commits before he feels complete. He risks failing, disappointing you, losing himself. Future B. He walks away and risks losing someone who forced him to confront the truth about himself. Both paths feel like loss. Both feel like sacrifice. Both feel like exposure. And in that tension, men often collapse. Not externally, you won't see it. Internally, though, it's an earthquake. He tries to rationalize. He tries to justify. He tries to convince himself he is making a logical decision, when in reality, he is making an emotional one that he doesn't have the emotional vocabulary to articulate. This is why your silence destabilizes him so quickly. Not because he fears losing you, but because your silence forces him to confront the decision he thought he had control over. Absence transforms "I'm not ready" into an open question. Was I telling the truth, or was I just afraid? And that question is where the unraveling begins. He starts to feel the edges of regret. Not enough to act, just enough to ache, just enough to wonder, just enough to replay little moments he pretended didn't matter, just enough to feel the beginnings of loss. Men are slow learners when it comes to emotional consequences, but they learn violently. Silence teaches. Distance teaches. Evolution teaches. By the time he realizes what he truly meant, it is already too late. But we're not done. It's where his behavior changes, where the contradictions start leaking through, where the man who said he wasn't ready begins to show signs that he may have lied to himself, not you.